They say things like, they're going to be okay. It's all right. They're going to be okay. Like we all want to provide that comfort with our words, but that is actually not comforting to give false promises and they're not okay. Mm-hmm. One thing that I will say is they're in the best of care. They're in the best of hands. This team's going to take such good care of them. So I know with confidence that we will fight for your loved one. And I've even said that the team is fighting so hard for your loved one. That I can say with full honesty. But what I can't say is they're going to be okay because I don't know that. I don't know how this is going to end up. Hey there. I'm your host, Sarah Lorenzini, a rapid response nurse and educator who loves telling stories to teach critical thinking. This podcast is for nurses who want the knowledge, skills, and confidence to respond to any emergency. With almost 20 years of experience in the ER and critical care nursing and a master's degree in nursing education, I have a lot of stories to share, and I love to nerd out and break down the pathophysiology, pharmacology, and nurses' role in emergencies. Stories bring learning to life. It is way easier to learn from and remember the stories that my colleagues and mentors have told me than anything I've read in a textbook. And that is why I made this podcast. Every episode is packed full of exactly what you need to know to handle whatever crisis that could arise on your shift. It's one thing to get the right answer on the test, but knowing how to detect when your patient is declining and what to do when your patient is crashing is what will make or break your day and might just save your patient's life. Today, we're talking about a topic that I am very passionate about that is surprisingly controversial. Today, we're talking about facilitating family presence during patient resuscitation. Yes, you heard me correctly. We're talking about having family present at the bedside while the team is performing resuscitative efforts on their loved one. I've watched the culture shift on this one from the start of my career until now drastically. I mean, like when I started nursing, we never invited the family into the room during resuscitation unless it was a pediatric patient. But now we talk about the importance of family presence during resuscitation and how to do it well during onboarding for the hospital. But despite all the research that supports this practice, there are still folks who refuse to allow family to stay or kind of roll their eyes at the idea. So to help me break down the why behind this shift and some of the best practices for how to implement this at your hospital, I have invited two nursing researchers who have studied the implementation of this very thing. So Margo and Jessica, welcome to the Rapid Response RN podcast.
Hey, happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation.
So glad to have you. So before we dive into the nuts and bolts of this, I wanted each of you just to introduce yourself. Can you just share a little bit about your career? How did you get involved writing for the AACN for this practice act called Facilitating Family Presence During Resuscitation and Invasive Procedures Throughout the Lifespan? So Margo, let's start with you.
Again, thank you for inviting me, Sarah. So my name is Margo Halm, and I have been a nurse for 4 decades and started my career.
Amazing.
Yeah, started my career in the adult surgical intensive care unit as a staff nurse, and then went to graduate school, became a CNS, clinical nurse specialist in critical care and cardiovascular nursing. And as I look back on my career, I can really see that as a new critical care nurse, I was really fascinated with all of the high-tech procedures and interesting surgeries and conditions that we were caring for, but I also really gravitated to the high-touch component. So I would say that I was a patient and family-centered care proponent, really from my early days as a staff nurse. And so as a CNS, I had an opportunity to be part of a family research intervention team. And we were exploring and studying a variety of different interventions, from flexible visiting, supporting children to be present at the bedside of an adult critically ill patient, and then eventually family presence during resuscitation. And so backing up, in those early days as a staff nurse, we were always shooing the family out when the patient suffered a cardiac or respiratory arrest. But, as a researcher and a CNS, I started to read the literature and become aware that hospitals were starting to support them. And that really intrigued myself and other members of the team. And then fast forward to being a researcher in magnet facilities, really bringing the best evidence to the staff to really challenge some of their assumptions and our practice to start considering offering family presence to those who really had a desire to be there.
I love it. Thank you, Margo. Thanks for the work that you're doing. And how about you, Jessica? What's your story? How'd you end up doing this?
I have been working always in pediatric medicine. So in pediatric nursing, which family-centered care is foundational to everything we do. So I have worked clinically always in emergency medicine. And as a new grad was actually participated in some of this original research looking at does family presence interrupt care and trauma care in the ER where we had a lot of resuscitations and invasive procedures. I was taught from the start that we always include the family. It was the expectation, not the exception. And it was about more, how do we do that best? How do we make that happen in really scary situations with children, with families, with siblings, and make that a proper part of care? I worked in the ER for a long time and then have transitioned to working in community hospital partnerships. So I go out and partner with hospitals that are not freestanding pediatrics, where pediatrics is a small part of what we do. And we do quite a bit of simulation training in that and really work on this idea of how do we work as a team, but also how do we work as a team with the family being present, which I was the first time I realized that in general adult practice that people didn't like having a family there all the time. So it got me really thinking about this and how do I help empower people? And then had this opportunity come up through research as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I don't know why it's always been like the norm for pediatrics, but then for adults, we're like, you don't need your family. Your family doesn't need to see this. Why is it? I don't know why it's so different, but hopefully we can dive into that a little bit more today. So can we back it up some and talk about the reasons why family presence during resuscitation is important for both the family and for the nurse?
Sure. So I think it's really important for the family because it helps to support their beliefs, their values, and their preferences. And, evidence-based practice is such a huge part of our culture in healthcare today. So I think it's really on us to, really be exploring what are the patient and family's beliefs and preferences and being able to honor that whenever possible. Research also shows over and over again that family members believe that it's not only their right to be present, but it's also their duty. And I think that comes up because they want to be able to fulfill those family roles, right? They want to be able to provide essential information to the healthcare team and to advocate for them, depending on what the interventions in the scenario is. And then certainly be able to be there at the bedside to offer support and comfort to their loved one. So those are some roles that the family can help provide not only for the patient and the healthcare team and then for themselves. By having that opportunity to be there, they can really see with their own eyes and they don't have to be in the waiting room wondering what in the world is happening. They can see that everything possible is being done. And if their loved one doesn't survive, then it also helps provide a sense of closure to them because they were able to be there and to bear witness.
Yeah. And people always say like, well, isn't that so traumatic to watch, your loved one being resuscitated? I mean, as someone who has loved ones, I would rather be there. And like you said, know that everything was being done for them than be in a quiet room by myself and just always wonder, like, was everything really done?
Okay.
I agree. And then as far as like the nurse, how is it actually helpful for the nurse to have family present? Because I think people might assume that it's not helpful to have family present in the room. Like that's going to be a hindrance to the nurse trying to perform resuscitative efforts.
Well, kind of at the top of the pyramid, I think that it helps support nurses and the healthcare team's philosophy of patient and family-centered care, as Jessica mentioned, it being really the foundation of all care that's delivered. So it provides the team with an opportunity to really facilitate communication with the family, again, receive essential information because, the family knows things about the patient that the healthcare team may not. That could be important for the care of their loved one. It gives them an opportunity to also to educate them, the family, about the patient's condition, how they're responding. And the research also shows that really provides an opportunity, having the family there to really remind the team about the patient's humanity And so I think philosophically and also from a practical perspective, it offers some advantages to the team.
Yeah, I agree with you, Margo. From all the research you've done and talking with people about this concept of having family present, what are some of the common misconceptions that you have heard from people, mainly healthcare providers, when it comes to allowing family to be present? Like, what are people's concerns about family being in the room?
Well, I can start, and then Jessica, you can chime in too. I think the main misconceptions really all center around fears that we have. First, that it will harm the family. You mentioned, Sarah, gosh, wouldn't be being there, seeing everything that's happening, wouldn't that cause a lot of trauma? But actually, the studies over the last several decades have shown that the opposite is true. Being there and being able to understand what's happening and bear witness actually leads to less stress, less fear and anxiety because they're experiencing it first time. So the studies have really shown that the opposite of our fears is true. The same is true for potential harm to the healthcare team. When this idea first came out, there's all sorts of, reasons that came out. Margo, there's no room at the bedside. We have to make sure that the co-team has access to the patients and they can do everything that they need to for the patient. And if we allow the family in, they're going to, disrupt the resuscitation process or interrupt our workflow. So all sorts of different fears like that. And even, the fear of being under a microscope. They're going to see something that we did wrong and it's going to lead to higher levels of litigation. So again, lots of potential harms perceived from the healthcare team, nurses and physicians alike. But again, the studies over multiple decades have shown that those fears have not come to fruition.
I mean, in my 20 years, through the bulk of my career, I've been able to invite families to the bedside. And all that time, I've only had one time where the family was, quote, in the way. And the only thing that happened was the wife ran in and just lunged towards her husband and fell on his chest. She was just so overcome with emotion. But once we were able to help her, support her, someone pulled her to the side and gave her that supportive presence, she was no longer in the way anymore. But just her initial reaction was somewhat disturbing, but it was just 2 seconds. And then we were able to get back to resuscitating her loved one. So yeah, I think these ideas that family are they don't want to be in your way. They want to be out of your way. Just kind of someone needs to direct them on how to do that. Jessica, what were you going to say about some of the concerns you've heard?
Yeah, I think all of these are concerns. I think safety is a big one. Are people going to have extreme emotional outbursts, like you said? But I think it also comes to the paradigm of they're in the way versus how are we setting up our systems that supports and understands that the family is a part of this dyad with the patient. And so I think in pediatrics in particular, the assumption is that the family will be there. So how then are we training ourselves? How are we preparing? How are we supporting them to be there at their bedside? Because that is what their patient needs. And even looking at research that talks about talking to the patients if they would want their family present, if they were to undergo this, and making sure that we're humanizing people. And I think coming from an emergency medicine background, there is a history where it can be easy to slip into bad habits, we'll call them bad habits that we know people do, of dehumanizing the patients. And, that's not so-and-so, that's now the appy in room 6. Well, they're not an appy. Hopefully they have a whole body and they're a whole person. And I think that it's a shift in how we approach care. And it's also this very, I think, nurse-focused lens of holistic family-centered care. And if we go at it as they're in the way, I think you mentioned this idea of being under the microscope. Or are we going to have to admit we don't know things and be human ourselves? And the research shows as well, parents and families appreciate when we admit that we aren't sure, that here's what we're doing, here's what we're thinking, and that helps build and maintain trust.
Yeah, I agree. So let's say it comes time to talk to the family and invite them to be present. How can healthcare teams effectively communicate the option of staying present during resuscitation to the family? Do you have any recommendations for what to say or what not to say when inviting family to be present at the bedside?
Yeah. So we talk a lot about this in the practice alert because it's great to have the idea, but how do you make this happen? One of the things, as we mentioned before, is having these conversations early, not only with the patient, but also with their family. What are their desires? What do they want? What are their expectations? But also with the rest of your healthcare team. It's best if you can have these conversations before it becomes the resuscitation or the invasive procedure. How do we normalize this until we have these conversations when we are introduced and meet people and saying, just what are your needs? I think as nurses, we're in some of the best positions to kind of be doing those ongoing assessments because we know how someone is on when they arrive is not how it's going to be in 2 hours. It's how are we just actively bringing these conversations up and just talking about it so that it becomes a normalized part of the conversation in the same way that we start thinking about end-of-life care and about these topics that get labeled as difficult conversations. How do we start making them a part of our practice so it doesn't feel so difficult? Some of the tools we talk about is using understandable language, explaining the care provided, facilitating, initiating kind of active interactions. And so a tool that can be used is the identification of a family presence facilitator.
Can you talk about that role? Like what type of person does this well? And what type of training would said person need to be a family presence facilitator or FPF? Hey guys, I'll get back to the episode in just a second, but I wanted to pause to let you know that if you love my podcast but wish there were more of these awesome episodes, well, I have great news for you. There is more. My Rapid Response Academy is basically podcast 2.0, plus the huge added bonus of community. I love hosting this podcast, but it's just me, recording into a microphone often by myself. And this extroverted gal who loves to both teach and mentor nurses just wanted more. So in the community I created, I get to teach live every Friday and break down topics that I think every nurse needs to know. From deep dives into the pathophys of every emergency you can think of, to some of the heart of nursing topics as well, like how to advocate with confidence for your patient, how to de-escalate situations, how to deal with bullies on the unit, how to be an amazing preceptor and charge nurse, and some of the mindsets and boundaries that have helped me stay in nursing for the last 20 years, not burn out, and thrive at the bedside. I love the opportunity to answer your questions live, and it's such a joy to see nurses supporting each other in this community. So, if you're an acute care nurse that wants to expedite your growth as a nurse and invest in yourself so that you can provide the best care to your patients, you would love my Rapid Response Academy. So to learn more, I put a link in the show notes for you. Hope to see you there.
Yeah, so the family presence facilitator is a member of the healthcare team who is dedicated to supporting the family during resuscitation or an invasive procedure at the bedside. So the role really is totally focused on supporting the family, and they never want to leave them alone. So they really need to stay with them throughout the event. And Jessica touched on some of the roles of the family presence facilitator, but some of the key ones are to explain situations when they might be asked to leave, so they know that up front. If they get overwhelmed or disruptive, like the event that you shared, Sarah, that was quickly resolved with a family member falling onto the patient, any other unexpected events that might happen. So the family really needs to understand what the boundaries are of them being present in the room. And then, of course, explaining to the family member what their loved one looks like, because I've seen many family members come into a critical care unit and faint, just normally, not even during a resuscitation, seeing, the ventilator and the ET tube and all kinds of other equipment that's attached to the patient. So we really need to explain, and prepare them what they're going to look like, what they're going to see, what they're going to hear, maybe what they're going to smell, the different types of equipment and procedures that are happening and what they might be hearing, so to help them interpret some of the jargon that the healthcare team uses. Of course, describe then how the patient is responding to those interventions and allow the family time to ask questions. So those are some of the main kind of educational preparation type roles of this person. Another role would be helping to gain access to their loved one, being able to get to the side of the bed, as that's practically feasible with what's happening, so they can touch, their hand or their leg or their foot, so they have a chance to speak to them. And then, of course, providing emotional support to the family and providing comfort measures to them, assessing how they're doing, if they want to stay for the whole event or if they want to leave periodically. So it's really, as Jessica mentioned, a holistic intervention, looking at the patient, explaining what's happening and supporting the family in terms of their response to being present at the bedside.
Yeah. So in your experience, do you have someone designated from the beginning, like you are going to be the FPF? Ready, set, go? Or is it just like someone just kind of rises to the occasion whenever it happens? What have you seen work well with regards to preparing for this?
I can address that a little bit. Ideally, I think the family presence facilitator should be a member of the code team. I think that's really best practice, because if it's no one's responsibility to support the family member, we know what happens in those situations. Then the family member might be in the room and not adequately supported. So I think it's best practice to have a dedicated person that has been prepared to be in this role to support the family. Although I would have to say, having worked with this intervention in a couple large hospitals, I think organically it happens maybe more of the latter, that it just someone rises to the occasion to support the family. So, these family presence programs do evolve over time, but ideally it would be somebody that is prepared. This member could be anyone on the team. It could be a nurse. It could also be a social worker or a chaplain. I worked in one large magnet facility where the chaplaincy program really took the lead, and they did a remarkable job in also following up with families after events. So there's many different ways that these programs can evolve over time. I would say some of the essential characteristics of a family presence facilitator obviously would be a nurse or a member of the team that has a really holistic perspective. They have good communication skills, they're compassionate, and they have good assessment skills, so they can be assessing again and responding, providing support as needed to that family member who's present.
Yeah. You make a good point. We think, it needs to be someone clinical that's with the family. They can explain what's going on. But the family doesn't need explanations about amiodarone and how it's working on the ventricles or the ET tube and where it's being placed. They don't need all that. A chaplain, a social worker is perfectly capable of saying, all right, looks like they're putting a breathing tube in your dad. Okay, they're giving some medications to help with their heart. Like real basic layman's is really all that they need. At my hospital, I would say it often starts with a nurse that does this role. And so when the chaplain shows up, they kind of assume that role. And honestly, they do amazing with it. And the nurse may kind of pop in intermittently to check on the family or to answer specific questions or to update them on the patient status. But the chaplain, man, they do an amazing job at the bedside of the patient and at the arm, supporting the family member. So we've talked about things that make a good FPF. Have you seen or heard of any things that would be like an example of what not to do? Like phrases not to say, things that just don't go over very well when it comes to facilitating family presence?
Jump in and say that anything you see on TV is typically what you don't want to happen. I think we all can laugh about what you see occur. One of the essential things, though, is false promises. Our role isn't to promise that the patient is going to get better, promise that we will save them. But the role, I think the name facilitator is important because your role is to facilitate the family by the bedside. And even as a nurse, I've had times where maybe you need to step in and help at the bedside. And so you can have our nursing assistant, someone, a child life therapist, just standing with the family to say, do you have questions? Let me go ask what you have. What you don't want is the false promises, someone who's kind of the pushy, just like, you've got to get out of the room now. I think patience is important. So you don't want that. And the person who's not focused on the family. My experience in emergency medicine, there's people who really love the codes and the traumas, and they want to be in the thick of it. And so if they were to take on that role, are they focused on that role of really the family member, or are they distracted by what's going on? So I think thinking about those things.
I agree. I think you hit the nail on the head. Most people that want to do this role do it well. It just like comes natural to them. The couple times I've seen it maybe not go the best is when the person, maybe they haven't been in healthcare long to know how these things often end up. And they say things like, they're going to be okay. It's all right. They're going to be okay. Like we all want to provide that comfort with our words, but that is actually not comforting to give false promises and they're not okay. So one thing that I have said, because I also want to provide comfort, one thing that I will say is they're in the best of care. They're in the best of hands. This team's going to take such good care of them. So I know with confidence that we will fight for your loved one. And I've even said that the team is fighting so hard for your loved one. That I can say with full honesty. But what I can't say is they're going to be okay because I don't know that. I don't know how this is going to end up. So I would say to the person who wants to be that supportive presence to the family, just your physical presence showing up is enough. If you really want to say something, you can explain maybe what's happening a little bit in simple terms. And if you really want to comfort them to know that like everything is being done, then you literally can say that. They're in such good hands. The team is taking such good care of them. We're doing everything we can to fight for your dad. That's an honest statement. You can say that, but you don't need to say, it's all right. They're going to be okay. Because you don't know that.
If the room is a little chaotic, I always find that just saying everyone in this room is focused on helping your family member. Everyone in here.
Yes.
That is our number one goal. And I think it's also when we facilitate what we say, but also our actions. So do they need to sit down? Should we just provide a chair? Maybe they need a glass of water, maybe a box of tissues. Thinking about, again, their holistic needs as a human being is really important.
So what would you say to a nurse who's listening to this podcast that's like, oh man, I really want to champion this at my hospital. I don't see this happening well or happening enough. Like, what recommendations would you give to someone who wants to start moving this forward, this like shifting the culture for their facility to having a dedicated FPF or to having some education about how to do this in a way that best serves the nurses and best serves the families?
To put a plug in for our practice alert, we also had this discussion because it's very important to empower the nurse at the bedside, to educate the nurses who are working in the units, but that needs to be supported with evidence-based guidelines, with policies, with protocols. And so as much as, just as important as it is to empower the bedside staff, we really need to make sure that we're championing it from a clinical leadership role and that those support systems are in place. And it can start from the urging of a bedside nurse or from a leader, but thinking about what are the associated things you need in place to be able to have a successful program. Similar to any initiative that you are trying to bring forward or practice change, you need to know what the policies already exist at your institution, understand what current practice is, and then identify who are your key stakeholders. So this facilitating family presence is a team approach. We need to start with first identifying who those stakeholders are at your institution, recognizing what already exists, understanding what current practice is. And we all know there can be a great deal of variation from unit to unit, from staff members to staff members. And so you really need to build a consensus among the multidisciplinary healthcare team, share with them the information and the research. I think all of the things you mentioned before, we have these people say, oh, it'll be bad, they'll interrupt. We've empowered you with the practice alert to say, here is a wealth of data and evidence that has been ranked and classified so that they have the research to support the practice you want to see. And then to work with leadership and partner with them to say, okay, how do we make this a practice here? How do we then incorporate to train people to do this? How do we encourage conversations? How do we think about screening families? It's going to look a little different everywhere, but hopefully the practice alert provides people with, I think, the most important thing, which is the evidence that guidelines can be based on.
I would just add to, some people aren't necessarily swayed by evidence, and the role of informal leaders and finding out if have been any successful family presence events in the hospital and to share those stories, because I think the stories plus the evidence can bring people along if they know that their colleague has been in an event and they can tell them, the whole story of how they handle different situations. That some people are really influenced by, the power of story.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's definitely like the naysayers, but in my experience with those people, they're like, well, I don't think that's a good idea because blah, blah, blah. Well, Susan, how much research have you done about this? Because the American Association of Critical Care Nurses just released a practice act that has pages and pages of research that goes well beyond your 15 years of nursing experience with a handful of patients. Like, I feel like we should probably go with the AACN's recommendation on this one rather than just your opinion. Thanks. That's my opinion on that one. But yeah, and then like you said, some people, the data doesn't do it. But if that informal leader rises up and is constantly sharing their story about the beautiful experience they had at the bedside with a patient and with their family and the family's experience, I think that moves mountains. That shifts culture for sure. Story is so powerful. So speaking of, do either of you have any stories or personal experience that you feel like really highlights the positive impact of facilitating family presence at the bedside?
I have many working in pediatrics and in emergency medicine. We do have a lot of invasive procedures and unfortunately a good number of resuscitations. But I've been able to witness how powerful having the family there can be. And I think it's most powerful when you think about when the outcomes are not ideal or what we'd want. So that result in patient death. No one wants a child to die. Children are meant to live. They're young. And so when we think about what's that worst case scenario, that's that gut-wrenching scenario for everyone involved. And to have seen family members be supported, be in the room, be told what's happening, have the resuscitation occur where they are aware and also a part of that conversation. So when we say that family present facilitator can talk to the parent and they asked, here's what we're doing, here's what's happening, what do you want us to continue to do? Here are some options, where we sometimes can kind of take over in those situations. They were included in that decision making. We had the parent sitting in a chair at the head of the bed, like over to the side. So we could fit the airway people on one side, respiratory therapy on the other, but we could have that parent right at that child's head. And we said, you can touch their shoulder, speak to them, talk to them. We're not sure if they can hear you, but please tell them whatever you need to do. And then when the decision was made that we were going to end the resuscitation, that family member was a part of that decision. And there were appropriate tears and such after. But I think after the process was done and the parent was going to leave, having this mother, I still get choked up thinking about it, hug me, thank us for allowing her to have that extra time, for allowing her to speak and say the things that she needed to say. But I think we talked about, too, to also see how everyone in that room was focused on her baby, and even if they're older, they're still their baby, and that we were all there for her and how much she felt that, to the point where she came back a few days later and gave us thank you notes and was trying to support us when we're like, we want to be supporting you. And I think when you have those humanizing experiences, it really changes your perspective and makes you think, what would I want? We're people too, and it's our family member. How would we want to be treated? And to be given that opportunity and that extra time is so important.
I mean, what a gift you gave that mother. Even though that's a hard last memory to have, that's the memory she would have wanted. Not by herself in a room. She would want to be at the head of the bed. That's so beautiful.
You can do it. I'll say you have to think about it a little bit ahead. You talk about the code team. We know in real estate, as we sometimes say, gets small. In particular, in pediatrics, we have very small patients. So, how do you get that parent to the bedside? How do we practice having a parent at the bedside? We practice so much. We practice CPR. We practice all of these things. You may work in an institution that does a lot of simulation. Thinking about incorporating that into our training is really important. It lets us think about it before it's in the moment. Like, where could we fit that parent? That institution had a spot for, each of the nurses and the staff, but we also had a spot, where can we put a family member? And we can't maybe have everybody in the room, but that facilitator can help moving those people safely in and out. And so that they are not impeding care, but that they still have that, like when you shared earlier and you talked about the wife who came in and just threw herself on her husband, you realize, isn't that what you would want, to have that connection with them? And so how can we facilitate that happening, but also making sure that we're still have the room to do everything we do?
Yeah. I think too, just kind of elevating the value of that role of the FPF. People are always like, oh, the hero, the one doing CPR, the one intubating. Oh, the FPF is so important in that room too. And it's honestly my favorite role in resuscitation. And when I look back over my career, some of the highlights were when I was the FPF, not necessarily when I was on the chest. Like those stick with me forever. Like when I went to nursing school, I did not go to nursing school because I wanted to sling epinephrine and do CPR. I went to nursing school to be with people who are suffering. And sometimes that's the patient, yes. And sometimes that's the family. And what an opportunity to get to really use our nursing skills for the family as well. I had an experience that I will never forget. I was a new charge nurse in the ER, and we had a young, 30-year-old come in cardiac arrest, a man. He was mowing his grass and collapsed, and the wife called 911 and all the things, right? So we're resuscitating. I had walked out of the trauma bay to go grab a supply. I'm the charge nurse, and I see a woman very frantically coming in holding a baby carrier. And I don't know how I knew, but I just knew that's the wife of this patient. I just knew it. And so I approached her, ma'am, I'm Sarah, I'm the charge nurse. Can I help you find someone? And she just, my husband, they called it in. I mean, she's a wreck, holding the baby carrier with maybe a 3-month-old baby. So I explained to her what's going on. Your husband is currently being resuscitated in room 1. Would you like to go in the room and be present while my team is resuscitating? And she said, yes, please. So we go in the room. I mean, she's a mess, as she should be. This is so traumatic. And she got this baby who's crying. So I kind of my team was doing a great job. They didn't actually need me to do anything specifically. So I just kind of took over the wife. So I'm there with her. I'm comforting her, giving her tissues, kind of explaining what's going on. Her baby's crying. So I asked, can I pick up your baby? She said, yes, please. So I'm holding the baby and bouncing this baby, talking with her. Unfortunately, we were unable to resuscitate him. He had been down for so long. He suffered a huge cardiac event. He's young. And we, after an hour and a half, ended up calling the code time of death. So heartbreaking. And then, afterwards, I'm with her, helping her make phone calls to her loved ones, helping her with the baby. She wasn't prepared for the baby to leave the house. And so she didn't have a formula. So we're getting her formula for the baby. I mean, all the things, right? It was really heartbreaking. But I was with her for hours, kind of walking her through this process, and the rest of the family reaching out to them. I will always remember it. Then about maybe a month later, my dad calls me. He's like, Sarah, I am so proud of you. I was like, okay, that's random. What are you proud of me for? He said, I was talking to my friend whose son-in-law just died last month, and they were telling me about this nurse that cared for their daughter and the baby, and the nurse called them on the phone and gave the news. And as they're describing this nurse and their experience with this ER nurse, he's like, I told him, that's my Sarah. I guarantee that's my Sarah that was taking care of your daughter. I guarantee. And it was. So even though my dad lives 2 hours away and this family is hours and hours away, my impact in that one patient reached all the way to across my state, right? And so the family, as they're recalling their experience with losing their loved one, the role of the nurse at the bedside is part of that memory. And so, yeah, my dad was very proud of me. I also was very proud of me because I feel like I made a difference. I'm so sad we couldn't save the patient, but I feel like the work that I did that day in caring for her husband and even, his child, I feel like that was so valuable and so rewarding. And that's why I went to nursing school. And so it's a hard role. It's not, it's a different kind of hard. I'm not sweaty from doing CPR, but I'm heartbroken from being so close to such heavy emotions. Mm-hmm. But for me, it's such an honor and a privilege to walk with families through such a scary circumstance.
When I think back to nursing school, we think of, what is our theoretical frameworks, for those of you who love that like I do. I think about Brenner and talking about what are these different types of nurses. And one of the skills was that idea of presence. And I struggled with that for a long time because, you think of your physical presence, but how are you really fully present? And I think if you can do it well during resuscitation or invasive procedure, it just improves every aspect of your care. And it humanizes what we do. I just think of that baby as you tell the story, and I think this 3-month-old baby who had such a short window of time with their father, they were able, even if they don't remember it, to be with him just a little bit more. And it'd be able to be with that baby a little bit more. And it's just beautiful.
Yeah, it is. There's so much beauty and humanity we get to behold as nurses. Even though it's heavy and it's hard, it's also so rewarding. So the couple things I still want to talk about before we close. Do you have any advice or wisdom for nurses who have faced resistance or opposition from maybe another healthcare provider about family being present? Say, I want to bring the family in, and the doctor says, no, get them out of here. Any wisdom you would give to that nurse to how to navigate that?
I've had this conversation many times, and I always find, like anything, being inquisitive, because if it's in the moment, we don't have a lot of time, maybe challenging to bring up the evidence. But just to say, can you explain to me why not? Why wouldn't we want them in there? What are your specific concerns? And I find usually if you ask it that way and come from a spirit of curiosity, people generally, it's usually something minor we can overcome. I don't want the family running in. We're going to have a family presence facilitator at the bedside. I'm worried that they'll judge me if I don't know the answer. And we'll say, well, actually, the research supports that the families actually are appreciative and that's not the case. So I think just asking why, and then we advocate for kind of asking to the team earlier, because there may be valid reasons. I've had one where, we're shooting multiple x-rays during a procedure, and they were concerned for the family's safety with the radiation and using different equipment. So there may be reasons, but having some of those reasons so you can then say, okay, but then how can we facilitate it again later and continue to bring up when it could be safe?
Just going to add to it, in that situation, you may not have a lot of time if the provider still, even after all of that conversation, says, no, I'm not comfortable. Because we really do need to have team consensus. That would be a disaster to try to bring in a family if someone on the team was not in agreement. So I think stepping back from those situations too, and just really looking at it from a best practice perspective, I think finding physicians that are really colleagues with nurses that are open to the evidence and to guidelines that are published in other professional organizations like the American Heart Association. I know in the presentation that Jessica and I are giving at the NTI, I'm going to be talking about how when the American Heart Association guidelines came out in 2000, for the first time ever, they said, consider inviting the family. So it was consider this as an option. And honestly, after multiple grand rounds with the interdisciplinary team, multiple cardiologists, once I had it in my hands and they saw the American Heart Association is recommending it, things started to change. So I think it takes multiple different avenues and to recognize that it is a culture change. So it's not going to happen overnight. The hospital that I practice at in Minneapolis, St. Paul, it really evolved over, I would say, a decade. So it does, planting the seed and doing the work, one by one and winning people over.
Yeah, I love it.
I also think we can continue to advocate, even if they're not initially in the room. Still assigning someone to be the family presence facilitator reminds us to keep that family informed, to stay by their side, to give them updates, but to also advocate in the room with the team. We're going to call this code. Speaking up and saying, may we wait a few minutes and bring the family into the bedside? May we continue resuscitation so that the family has an opportunity to come in and say goodbye or to be present when we make that final call? And if they may not be comfortable during other parts of the resuscitation, if they've already made a decision to end it, can we give that family a few more minutes? And can we continue to advocate.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
That's some hardcore advocacy right there. But that is the heart of nursing, the way you just described, Jessica. Like, it's uncomfortable to go head to head to someone who disagrees with you, maybe who's someone who's more experienced than you or has more degrees behind their name than you. But I feel like as advocates for the patient and now their family, that's our ethical and moral responsibility, is to speak up and have that hard conversation. Well, guys, this was a really good conversation today. Thank you so much for the research that you've done and putting it all together into one document to help serve the nursing community. So we have that to whip out of our pocket and say, well, actually, the research shows this. Actually, studies show this. Actually, the AACN says this recommendation. That has value. So thank you guys for the work you've done. If someone wanted to get a hold of either of you and ask more questions or guidance for how to apply this to their practice, how would they find you? How'd they get a hold of you?
Well, people can always email me. My email is margohalm@gmail.com.
I said, we're also going to be at the NTI conference.
Yes.
And we'll be providing copies of the practice alert, which our contact information is also included there for those who have access, or they can request access, hopefully from their hospital library or a school they may be associated with.
Okay, awesome. And I will link all this stuff in the show notes too to make it easier for my listeners to find you guys. And if they're going to NTI, I'll link to your actual sessions. They can come find you and hear more about it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you guys again. It was such a privilege to talk with you. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and experience with my audience. I hope it serves so many nurses well.
Thank you again for inviting us.
Thank you. Before you go, I have an exciting announcement. You can now earn CEs for listening to this podcast. That's right. Our Renegade has teamed up with podcast hosts like me who are delivering amazing content that not only educates, but inspires you to be the best for your patients. You get to learn and earn continuing education credits while absorbing knowledge from thought leaders and innovators in the field of health and medicine. You're already listening to podcasts during your commute, at the gym, or while unwinding after a long day. So why not earn your CEs at the same time? And that's where pod classes come in. Yep, it's just what it sounds like. It's CE learning through podcast. To learn more, I put a link in the show notes for you. Well, thanks for listening. I hope you learned something that will save a life. Remember, nursing is a team sport, so trust your intuition and don't give up advocating until you are confident you've done what's right by your patient. The views and opinions expressed on this show are that of Sarah Lorenzini's. That's me and mine alone. They are not intended as medical advice and should not take the place of your institution's policies or procedures. Evidence-based practice is ever-changing, and your patient care should reflect the current best practice. So if you want to get in contact with me, you can shoot me an email at sarah@rapidresponsern.com or on all social media platforms as the Rapid Response RN.